Hello students, the entire globe is affected by COVID-19 pandemic and the virus is spreading like wildfire. By September 7, 2020, India had reached number 2 spot in global COVID cases. So I say to you my dear students, please take care of yourself and your family. Stay safe. Well, a lot of information is out there for all of us on how to stay safe. Here is a clip of Kailasa's views on solutions for COVID-19. If you think that this Maharaj is Kailasa, you are mistaken. Kailasa is a country and it has been formed last year by this godman Swami Nityananda. This is a news article about the same that made headlines last year, that even as the police were on the lookout for this self-styled godman, he founded his own country, designed its flag, constitution and emblem. This new country is set up on an island near Ecuador. I am sure you are intrigued by this new country. Similarly, the world was intrigued 237 years ago when a new country was established by the people in the year 1783 by defeating the British. That was the United States of America. Today, it is known as a superpower, but once upon a time, it was colonized by the British, very much like India. Today, America and India are closely connected. In the political sphere, if Kamala Harris, the vice presidential candidate, has a link to India, Trump's ad has a direct reference to India.
Friends, we in India have connected well with President Trump. The words of candidate Trump, अब की बार ट्रम्प सरकार. He needs no introduction. His name comes up in almost every conversation. The President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump.
America loves India. America respects India. And America will always be faithful and loyal friends to the Indian people. We have come to know the splendor of the 4 million Indian Americans. They are truly spectacular people. Thank you all for the contributions you've made to my beloved country.
Having watched that clip, let us now take a quick look at the birth of America in our chapter, The American War of Independence. In our very first chapter, Early Trade Activities, we talked of geographical discoveries and how Portugal and Spain were ahead in the game. In his quest to discover India, Christopher Columbus stumbled upon America on 12th October 1492. This discovery of America by Columbus and further explorations by Amerigo Vespucci and John Cabot initiated the process of colonization. And then there was a competition among European countries to colonize the American continent. This map portrays how deep the occupation and colonization had reached by around 1700. The European monarchs wanted new lands to expand their empire and considered the colonies as a source to obtain different kinds of commodities and revenue. The British occupied 13 states in America, which became the extension of the Great British Empire. The first one was Virginia, and the last one, or the 13th one, was Georgia. These 13 colonies launched a fight against the mighty British. It was more of a David versus Goliath scenario, but the willpower of the American revolutionaries prevailed. It is for this reason we come across the initial American flag with 13 stars representing the 13 colonies who united against British might. The present-day flag of the US has 50 stars representing 50 states and 13 stripes representing the 13 original colonies. American revolutionaries finally won after a series of battles, and it shaped world politics after its victory over the British. Now, in international politics, there was a new ideology where rights of the people were at the center of all things. The concept of nation-state was popularized, giving importance to the right of the people, bound by a geographical territory, having common cultural and historical background to form their own government. The foundation of democracy in the modern world was laid by America, and their victory and the democratic principles influenced thinkers around the world and in Europe. This led to the French Revolution, in which the monarchy was overthrown and a republic was established with a promise of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Thus, in Europe, the first nation-state was established in France. The American War of Independence was thus the first ever conflict between an imperialistic country and her colonies. It proved that it was not impossible to overthrow the rule of a powerful country if people had the will and determination to form their own government. Haven't you heard? Where there is a will, there is a way. The British arrived in America initially as traders and then took over the land. They introduced discriminatory trade practices, only looking at their own profit. The Americans tolerated all this as they depended on England for their security from France. Here we see that France had occupied a major part of America, and hence the natives of the 13 colonies looked for some sort of security from the British. But when France was defeated by British in the 7 Years' War and Canada was transferred to England by the Treaty of Paris in 1763, there was no fear in the colonies about a French invasion. It is from this point onwards that the American War of Independence took shape. The British that entered as traders and now were the rulers introduced many taxes passed by the British Parliament to stave off the financial crisis that England faced after the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War meant a lot of expenditure for both the countries. Imagine, the battle continued, no doubt with breaks, for 7 long years. It is for this reason that last year you studied that when Louis XVI ascended the throne of France in 1774, he found that the treasury was empty. Similarly, there was a financial crisis in England as well. However, England blamed the 13 colonies for their expenses in the 7 Years' War. They never said, "We want to control the colonies," but rather, "We fought 7 Years' War to protect the colonies, and therefore the colonies must pay." Thus, during the rule of King George III, the British Parliament passed many acts imposing taxes on the colonies. The Sugar Act was imposed in 1764, putting a tax on sugar imported from West Indies, and in 1765 the Stamp Act introduced tax on different written documents such as newspapers, pamphlets, legal documents, and even playing cards. The American people protested against such taxes and passed a resolution of no taxation without representation. They argued that the British Parliament had no right to impose taxes on them since there was no American representative in the British Parliament. But the British Parliament did not listen to them and continued with the taxes. In 1767, the Townshend Act imposed tax on the import of glass, paper, and paints. The people revolted and the British withdrew this tax under pressure. In 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, by which the East India Company got the monopoly to carry out tea trade with the colonies. The American people realized that the Tea Act was one-sided business and resolved to teach the British a lesson. On a winter night of December 16, 1773, the revolutionaries, under the cover of darkness, entered a British ship that was anchored at Boston Harbor. The ship was full of tea boxes. Disguising themselves as Native Americans, that is, dressing up like Red Indians, they entered the British ship and emptied the 342 tea boxes into the sea. This was done to protest the British monopoly over tea trade. This incident encouraged revolutionaries across America and became famous as Boston Tea Party. The British East India Company was shocked to find their entire consignment of tea down the drain. The British Parliament imposed many repressive acts as a result. They closed down the Boston Harbor as well till the tea lost in the Boston Tea Party was paid for. Major events of the American Revolution. The First Continental Congress was convened on 5th September 1774. They declared their right to life, liberty, and property. This was attended by representatives of 12 colonies, and they sent a petition to King George III, but did not receive any positive response. Then the colonists decided to boycott British goods. The Second Continental Congress was convened on 10th May 1775. The conflict had already begun at Lexington and Concord. In the Bunker Hill conflict, the strength of the colonists was evident. So when the delegates met at Philadelphia, John Hancock was elected as the president, a Continental Army was formed, and George Washington was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the colonial army. The delegates adopted the Olive Branch Petition to be sent to King George III in order to avoid the conflict, but this was rejected by him, and he declared that the colonies were in rebellion. On 4th July 1776, Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence. This document was known as the noblest document in the history of mankind, for it clearly stated the basic principles of democracy, such as the right of the people to liberate themselves from tyrannical government, and that the government should be based on the consent of the governed. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777 was a turning point in the conflict because after this battle, the colonial army, with the help of the French forces, was able to defeat the British army. It was on 19th October 1781, in the Battle of Yorktown, that George Washington accepted the surrender of Lord Cornwallis and his British forces. The Treaty of Paris was signed between England and the colonial representatives in 1783, which proclaimed the independence to the colonies and the establishment of the United States of America. Well, the significance of this American Revolution, it gave birth to an independent country called the United States of America. It strengthened the idea of a right of revolution and accepted the supremacy of the people, which became the basis of state. It also accepted the supremacy of the Constitution over the government, which became the guiding principles of modern democracies. The victory of the American Revolution influenced the movements around the world. In fact, it is said that there would have not been any French Revolution if the American Revolution had not taken place. The French Revolution in turn had inspired a number of European revolutionary movements, and all these movements began with the principles of liberty and self-determination fought for in the American Revolution.